recording.
Cool. Right. Well, hello everyone. My name is Henriette Vries and Emma Duran Sanchez is with me. And for those who may not be familiar with us, I think most of you are, but I think there are also a couple of new faces. We were two of the main organizers for the Feminist Futures Helsinki Hackathon in May of this year. And since the hackathon, we've spent countless hours reflecting on how we organized the hackathon, what the outcomes were, and we have dreamed of ways to somehow utilize and mobilize this great community that has been created around this initiative. And so a couple of you may have seen us talk about this before, but what you're getting today is sort of the extended version, and we're really excited to be able to dive a bit deeper today. But before we do that, we like to begin our sessions just with a bit of grounding. We know you all live busy lives. Sorry, is this better? Yeah, we know you all live busy lives and you have a lot going on. So sometimes it can be a little hard to tune into the experience or the moment that you're in. So we'd like to just invite you all to take a moment to reflect on the environments that you're currently living in and just the relationship that you have to the elements around you and on your connection to the systems that you're part of. So you may think of environmental or climate systems and how you contribute to or extract something from those systems. And the systems you're part of may also be social or interpersonal, meaning the people that you know personally or acquaintances you have. They may also be political, like the type of local or national government that makes decisions about your everyday life. And if you're at university or if you have a job, they may also be examples of systems or environments. Now, these systems are all quite different in nature, but one thing they all have in common is hierarchy, which is what determines who gives and who gets, who benefits from the system and who does not. And of course, who is actively oppressed or discriminated against because of said system. So it's essentially about power. But let's just rewind a bit here. So back in April, May, Eva and I, along with our team, organized a hackathon, as you know. But in addition to this, in order to sort of get the most out of the experiment, Eva and I decided to co-write our thesis on feminist hackathons at the intersection of feminism, participatory design, and real estate. And so in this presentation, we'd like to share with you some of the insights from the research and also explain a bit what happened in the Feminist Futures Helsinki Hackathon, mainly from the perspective of organizing it. And after that, we'll share some reflections that we had during the writing process. And finally, we'd love to open up the discussion with you all and try to think collectively about potential future initiatives for Feminist Futures Helsinki.
Thanks, Henry. So yeah, in this thesis, we explored the intersections of four major theoretical pillars, the ones you can see. They're feminisms, real estate, land use and urban planning, designing for participation, and the culture and politics of hackathons. And we created this figure to illustrate the main concepts and the interconnections that we have uncovered through the literature review. And then in the following slides, we're going to share some of the key ideas that we explored about every pillar. So the first one is feminisms, but before that, we'd like to make a quick note on terminology. In this presentation, we're referring to feminism as the political, social, and economic equality of all people. And we understand innovation not only as a novelty, but also as giving attention and resources to tackle a particular situation related to a specific community. So the first pillar, which was feminisms. There we explored different concepts such as the matrix of domination, intersectional feminism, depoliticization, who questions legitimacy of power, feminism in data and academia, feminism in Finland. And also we explore possible paths of collaboration. And we believe that actually being aware of what depoliticizes feminisms and separates it from the initial roots and the initial struggles helped us to ask the question that also serve us to explore more critically the other pillars of the thesis. And even though the fields are different, we argue that the challenges that prevent feminism from being truly intersectional, the fields can vary still, like the real estate and hackathons, but they share the similarities because they're still systems made by people for people, subject to the power dynamics in the matrix of domination. Then in the second chapter, we explore the connection between real estate, land use, and urban planning. For the real estate industry, put simply, it moves a lot of money. It has a lot of power in deciding how livable surroundings look like, feel like, what types of construction, spaces, services, activities are kept, and which are dismissed. And yet, for example, for commercial and private real estate investments, we find that the decisions behind investments are usually purely based on economic estimations, which are also very hard to access or to understand because they rely on indexes that cannot be found in one single place, that they are affected by another multitude of variables that at the same time are dependent on global corporate finance dynamics. So the industry portrays their decisions as rational, logic, and impartial, maybe as you can see in the first graphic in the slide, but in the way that it affects the livable environments, as you can see in the other picture, we see how they're not impartial at all. And that contributes to upholding environments that are only best accessed and experienced by those occupying positions of privilege. And this both constrains and reproduces social roles and cultural expectations. So the real estate industry is perhaps one of the strongest players in delimiting our imagining of how things should be prioritized to be, and yet how values viewed and counted in that industry is scarily narrow. So in this thesis, we also talked about land use and, for example, how even if the public sector is in theory meant to protect public over private interests, there is this global neoliberal trend that pushes cities to privatize land. In the context of Finland, it can be seen in the examples of Lapinlahti and Eirinranta. And also in the case of Finland, as Sami activist Petra Laiti put it, the very understanding of land use in the Finnish legislation is imposing a compartmentalized understanding of culture and life that threatens and discriminates against indigenous practices. So in a nutshell, in this chapter, we explain how livable environments become a reflection of how hierarchies are developed and executed and involve different actors and elements who operate in several systems. And I'm going to change the slide here, but who do not always share the same motivations or incentives. So, for example, in the case of land use and real estate, dwellers and private developers are part of the same system and they're bound to each other, but the incentives for private developers tend to be purely economic and short-term. And these don't match with those of the dwellers, which are more bound to transgenerational livelihood and well-being. And this mismatch in incentives and motivations is problematic because it highlights the need for for feminist approaches, because with them, this irreducible complexity of our society can be both acknowledged and then addressed.
So as our supervisor, anthropologist and Professor Eva Berglund put it in a conversation with us, we're currently experiencing a generalized squeeze. And the squeeze affects processes of democratic accountability and social welfare provision. And it's a situation that is made even worse by the flawed idea that solutionism and technological advancements will save us, when the reality is that we need to address these issues at multiple intersections of the system, and we need to challenge the power imbalance that created the issues in the first place. So we're in need of methods that acknowledge and respect a plurality of experiences and perspectives. For example, in the field of urban planning, for decades in many cities, feminist urban planners, geographers, activists have all understood this, and it has resulted in, for instance, methods to map experiences like this relief map by Rodo de Sarate, or in activities for participatory exploration and decision-making, or in discussions to counter harmful deficit narratives about how we think of and how we engage with the places that we live in, like the last contribution of Fema Planning to the magazine Nonin, which is great, so you should check it out. And in line with this prioritizing and caring for this plurality of experiences, participatory design became another interesting topic to explore in the thesis. So we were introduced to the concepts of imagination battle and imagination collaboration through the work of author, facilitator, and activist Adrienne Maree Brown. And these concepts are basically grounded in the understanding that we live inside the imagination of other people. So an imagination battle is when you have to fight against something that is being imagined about you, or fight against someone who is doing that imagining, such as the presumption that men are superior and women inferior. And imagination collaboration, by contrast, is about inviting someone to be part of an idea or to create a new idea with you. And it's where dreamers and builders meet, and it's also about dignity and harm reduction. And so in this way, Adrienne Maree Brown poses the questions, how do we make sure that the people who are most impacted by whatever's happening in a place get to co-imagine how that place can be? And how do we prevent those people from being excluded from the conversation because of someone else's power dynamic imagining? And she argues that there is a conversation in every room that only the people present can have. And it's our responsibility to find that conversation. And so they prompted us with the questions, what is the next most elegant step we can take? And how do we find the conversations that help us see our impact? And designing for participation is a much more complex process than what initially meets the eye. Power differentials, context, and history, it all plays a vital role in the outcome of such a process. And the reframing of designers as facilitators simultaneously demands a reframing of what it means to participate. So we've got to ask who gets to participate, who has the power to decide who gets to participate, and what are the conditions we must create to achieve equitable participation. And so in this chapter of the thesis, we dove into design justice, which is a framework that provides a clear set of principles to ensure an intersectional approach to design. And I really, really recommend you look into this work if it sounds interesting to you. And also the book by the same name by Sasha Costanza-Chock. So that was Design Justice. And we believe there's a potential in applying feminist values in participatory settings. And for that reason, we'd like to share with you part of our process and learnings in organizing this feminist hackathon. You're muted.
Thank you. So before we move on to talking about the Feminist Futures Helsinki Hackathon, I'd like to give you a brief explanation of what a hackathon is. What you see, maybe it's the most stereotypical image of what a hackathon is. They're usually short events, usually from a few hours to a weekend, in which people come together in teams and compete against each other to develop solutions to solve a challenge. And these events, they have actually been heavily critiqued for perpetuating a culture of exclusion, for being too solutionist and reductionist with complex problems, and for reinforcing this idea that technology can solve problems rooted in very deep socioeconomic inequity. However, like any other events that brings people together, it also has the potential of co-creation, to build community, and to develop connections that can spark good things after the event. And also the fact that these events have gained so much media attention and mobilized resources makes this format interesting to investigate. So then we wonder, how would it look like? How can we design hackathons that instead of tech-centrism, solutionism, and competition, center situatedness, reflexivity, and collaboration? And we found the work of a collective at the MIT that is called Make the Breast Pump, Not Suck. And they had organized several feminist hackathons before. And then in parallel with them, we ended up organizing a feminist hackathon here in Helsinki, the FFH hackathon, together with a team of 10 people that some of them are in the audience today. And So just in a nutshell, the Feminist Futures Helsinki Hackathon was a 2.5-week long online hackathon that took place between May 15th and May 13th this spring. And it saw 50 participants and more than 20 partners and mentors, primarily based in Finland, coming together to imagine feminist futures for the Finnish society with 4 thematic tracks: urban futures, inclusive futures, well-being futures, and eco-justice futures. And then we created 11 design principles to guide our process, and they served us as a way to align our purpose and priorities of our work. And the challenges, for instance, the first one, the challenges presented in a hackathon are often brought by companies and big corporations, usually with the ultimate goal of increasing revenue or attracting new talent. We wanted to shift the focus onto issues with a more systemic nature and societal impact. So we decided that the project should come from grassroots and community organizations. The next principle sort of speaks to this as well, since the hackathons are usually mainly attended by, programmers and university students, we wanted to attract and reach participants beyond academia and tech, so the discussions in the events could potentially be nurtured by more diverse background and experiences. Also, since the hackathon took on a new format, we decided that it should follow a curated journey of 4 steps accompanied by 4 toolkits. And we created voluntary toolkits for each phase of the hackathon with resources for the participants on topics such as intersectional feminism, anti-racism, accessibility, and more. Another way that we presented alternative perspectives to the participants was through our public program, which had a workshop and 5 talks with a total of 7 speakers. All the talks were recorded and you can find them on YouTube if you want to watch them, or on our website. And then the final 2 design principles that I want to highlight relate to the interactions between the teams. We decided that no winners would be named because we didn't consider the issues at hand to be solvable in a couple of weeks. Therefore, no one could really win. Instead, we decided that there should be joint sessions to encourage collaboration and cross-pollinations across teams. So what were the issues at hand? There was a total of 12 teams and 12 projects that prompted participants and partners to collectively imagine intersectional feminist futures on topics such as semi-allyship, surrogacy, eco-justice, countering online violence, feminist and anti-racist internet, and much more. During the hackathon, the teams had time to work on their projects in whatever way they wished, leading them to whichever result they wanted, that it felt it made more sense to them. And each team was offered mentoring by their own partner organization as well as one external mentor. Then in this presentation, we will not go deep in any specific project, but sometimes something that we wanted to highlight is that all teams quickly identified hierarchies and power structures in whatever setting they were investigating. And we believe they did that by being very reflecting on their position, classic feminist approach, but also by valuing and listening to the experiences and knowledge of other people. And we learned so much with them because after their process, the proposals were a reflection of their discussions, an invitation to keep questioning, to get together, to get organized. And we actually find this to be very helpful to work with the complexity and contradictions of current challenges instead of against them. And then we also believe that the fact that arts and community organizations developed the project and mentored the teams really supported that. After the hackathon, 8 participants responded to the question, are there any topics you would like to see explored from a feminist perspective in the futures? You see some of the answers on the screen, but the list is longer. It read, employment of immigrants in Finland, inclusive education, inclusive friendly municipalities, migration and gender diversity, STEM, the Roman in Finland, Christian, Lutheran and Islamic feminisms, homelessness, employment for people with special needs, participatory democratic practices, public affairs, politics or electoral system, economics, restorative justice, technology, history, housing, forestry, and women's ability to return to the workforce after stepping out other than maternity leave. And then from this long list, what we read is no new from what feminists have been saying for decades. There is potential in having spaces and activities to have conversation that center situatedness, reflexivity, questioning power, because then this then easily relates to whatever background or interest people have, and as it has the potential also to transfer this sensitivity to other fields.
So now we'd like to share with you some of the discussion points that emerged from the research, and also from reflecting on how the Feminist Futures Helsinki Hackathon was organized and how it unfolded. So these come from chapter 5 and 6 in our thesis. They're a bit mixed up now in this presentation, but they're from the discussion and conclusion. And there's so much more written there than what we can cover now in the presentation. So these are really just a few highlights. A recurring theme throughout the entire process has been terminology and feminist buzzwords. So it has been and continues to be an ongoing learning process, which has required a lot of reflexivity and discussion amongst ourselves and with the people that we've spoken to along the way. So we discussed how we still call it a hackathon, despite its many differences from a tech hackathon, a traditional hackathon. And this choice of terminology, for example, might have negatively affected, for instance, how many people decided to apply and who was interested in partnering. We believe there is a reason to assume that some people would have rejected the idea based on this label and all the connotations that it carries. We also found, for example, that words like inclusion, diversity, equity meant different things to different people. And some people thought of inclusion as a word that refers to the patronizing behavior of deciding who, when, and how somebody else can be included. Meanwhile, for others, inclusion didn't have any negative connotations. And a similar critique was directed at the discourse around centering and giving voice. And we also had discussions with the partners on using words like civic participation and innovation to refer to the act of getting together and discussing things, because this is perhaps one of the oldest traditions that humans have, so how can that be innovative? But we've learned from this experience that there are often no one size fits all or like magical words that can fix that situation. You know, words do matter, of course, and whenever possible, they should be carefully chosen with attention and consideration. However, sometimes we felt it was more useful to just explain what we wanted to convey in multiple ways. And so in creating the hackathon, we followed an open and participatory process where we wanted the partners to shape the event with us. And this little illustration shows more or less how we approached partnership building. So you can sort of see, like, from when we first identified a potential partner, either from our own contacts, from recommendations, from desktop research, how we sort of went about the initial contact, and how it was a very iterative process of trying to figure out, you know, with time availability, capacity, and wishes, do we share the same values? How is the capacity matching? Is this a partner that could become project owner or a mentor or a speaker, or perhaps just someone who points us to the next step, to the next person. But yeah, it was a very iterative process. However, that kind of work requires time to show up in meetings and to imagine and to propose and to design together, and having time to spare is a privilege. And we realized that this may lead the most privileged partners to actually have more time to shape the event. So that's something that, yeah, we think is really important to sort of keep in mind going forward. And building better relationships with grassroots organizations go hand in hand with thinking about what extended structural support might allow more people impacted by those issues to participate in the hackathon itself, given that they wanted to, of course. For the future, we think that one way to organize hackathons in a way that can benefit more partner organizations would require, first of all, an extended framework of time to operate, 2, money to compensate partners and to support the participants in being able to contribute better, and 3, less diversity in projects, so that now we had 12 very different projects, so less diversity in the project matters, in order to allow for a more extensive collection of people who are directly influenced to participate in these events. And so the question of money doesn't only apply to partners, but also participants. We'd often said that one thing we really appreciated the most was people showing up to have difficult conversations. And we still mean that. However, showing up doesn't come for free. It has a cost too, and that cost is money. That cost is time. Duh. And we have been reflecting a lot on how the time invested in participating in hackathons might be taken for granted, especially for students, assuming that they might be more likely to have time to spare. And indeed, one of the critiques that hackathons have received is that some corporations and even governments might overburden participants to take personal responsibility for the decline in civic resources. And one of the things that inspired us from our mentors at the MIT Collective was that they had put aside a budget to financially compensate every single participant for their time. But sadly, in our case, we couldn't afford that, as all the funding we received went to compensate speakers and mentors, and instead we offered a small gift as a symbolic gesture to the participants. But when thinking about how participants experience the event, it's also important to consider participants' safety in situations where they could potentially be triggered by working on a topic that they have direct experience with. So we wondered, how can events that center work on social justice and which talk about power imbalance be designed in a way that enables participants with different life experiences to access this space in a safe and non-extractivist way? And how can these events be designed so that they do not increase the emotional toll and the emotional labor of people who have had direct experiences with the topic at hand? And one way we dealt with this was by making the project briefs quite open-ended and by not requiring specific outcomes. Instead, we wanted to allow the teams to decide what to do and how to do it. And some people found it easy to have flexible briefs and have the freedom to decide, but I think maybe other people struggled a bit with the briefs being so open-ended. And so now after the hackathon, we keep reflecting, how might we make space for both? How do we make space for the freedom for those who thrive in such flexible situations, but also provide enough structure to make it a good experience for those who thrive best in less flexible situations?
And also would like to share reflections on low-tech and no-tech solutions. And is that we as organizers encourage participants to approach their topics from whatever their background was, using whatever skills they had. And we encourage also low-tech and no-tech solutions, not because we think that technology is harmful and cannot solve anything. We simply actually wanted to challenge the idea that technology can alone solve systemic issues. For example, one cannot solve racism with technology if the system in which one is developing the technology is inherently racist. So we encourage not jumping straight into making an app or something other technological quick fix, but to rather explore the issue at hand at a deeper level. And the absence of the tech focus also placed a lot more value onto topical expertise and other skills. For example, one participant expressed the value that she had found in this by working with a sociologist in her team, saying it brought such different perspective and it was crucial to develop their work. However, the shift in focus to value plurality of knowledges also opened up a new challenge regarding theme formation. One of our partners at the Museum of Impossible Forms spoke to the importance of being aware of this dynamic when designing the event, and to make it so people with different types of expertise in several topics can work together and still have the certainty to count on the whole team's expertise. And now also, while there was and is definitely a lot of positivities and potentials in this feminist hackathon. There are some tensions we want to acknowledge. We created this visualization inspired by an article by the fantastic researcher, Catherine D'Ignazio. And this visualization shows 4 major tensions that Catherine and her team identified in their work with feminist hackathons. And that also we have recognized in our own work. The roots of the tree then show the power structure that feed and cause these tensions to surface. So systems thinking theory says that to optimize the whole, we don't have to improve the parts, but the relationship among those parts. And what our findings suggest is that universities can serve as a bridge between community and academia to better serve and compensate the local community and make academic practices more sensitive to a plurality, to tackle also this role in perpetuating this epistemic oppression that academia as an institution also does. However, this will require dedication to break down barriers to academia, like for instance, through language and resource distribution. In our thesis, we provided a deeper insight into the societal value created when community and grassroots organizations set the agenda of a hackathon. That is not only valuable for the teams or those directly involved, but especially for the broader public and governments. There is a potential for hackathons to be a stage that brings attention to the works of grassroots organizations, but we still need better structures and resources, money, to support this bridge. And at the other part of the bridge, we also need structures that can push the project's outcomes forward. As such, we believe that hackathons can function both as initiators of innovation and impact extenders. In addition to this, our findings suggest that hackathons have the potential to become places that aim to ask questions rather than to provide answers.
Yes, so before we end this presentation, we just want to share 3 of our main takeaways that relate to how hackathons can be designed with feminist values and principles at the core. And just a quick note, this is the lovely illustration that Mia Minerva made for the hackathon. So number 1, it matters who sets the agenda. We found that it really does make a difference who sets the agenda. And in our case, it was a collaborative effort between our organizing team and the community organizations that we were working with. Number 2, processes matter as much as the outcome. And this one could actually both be used for the process and of the participants in their projects and also our internal process of organizing. So in the case of the participant projects, what we're referring to is the shift in perspective and the relationships that are created through the hackathon process. Internally, we've learned a lot about rethinking the relationships between academia, the private sector, and art and community organizations as a way to explore possibilities of funding and remuneration that can turn historical distrust into possibilities of cooperation. And finally, accountability matters. When framing anything as feminist, there's an inherent responsibility to stay true to the struggle from which feminism grows. And that's essentially a responsibility to be accountable. The way we see it, hackathons as a format can work to challenge the way in which power is distributed and the processes that maintain the status quo in these so-called innovation spaces. And we see feminist hackathons as a way to legitimize important and critical conversations as outcomes rather than only encouraging and valuing prototypes and products. And there's a sense of urgency bound to the hackathon format. And we believe that this can be leveraged to encourage introspection as well as action in what we have dubbed the comfort of convenience, which is what we call the state of mind that we have observed that the majority of people in Finland and the rest of the Nordics really are in. And it's a state of mind where the trust in government and the trust in the systems becomes almost numbing and certainly counterproductive to activism. As the last highlight before we head into the discussion, we'd just like to summarize some of the potentials that we have identified for feminist hackathons. First of all, by bringing attention to topics and issues that are otherwise ignored, feminist hackathons can potentially shift the public discourse as it allows and encourages critical conversations. And in addition to this, by attracting different partners and participants, they are likely to diversify the narrative on certain issues. Feminist hackathons also have the potential to encourage educational institutions like universities to rethink partnerships with community organizations in a process of collaboration. And we also see potential in having hackathon processes that encourage reflexivity and positionality, because we believe this will offer participants and partners an intellectually stronger standpoint to address the presented issues. And we also recognize how feminist futures imagined in a hackathon may function as a tool for backcasting, which is a method used to basically create the worlds we desire. And finally, as hackathons are a platform where different issues can be discussed, the benefits I just mentioned can extend to many diverse fields and industries who participate in and engage with feminist hackathons, such as the field of real estate or design, or really any of the long list that Eva mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so thank you. That was a presentation. It was a lot to listen, so thank you so much for staying with us. I'll stop the recording now, actually.